So welcome again to the MaineMOM Echo. Mariah's going to move us through the screens. So we're super excited to have Amanda Thompson here today, and I'll introduce her when we're ready to go. Then we're going to have a case presentation, which unfortunately that fell through last minute. So the amazing MaineMOM nurse care coordinator that I work with at MaineMed and I are going to provide our best case that we can and look for recommendations on that. Next slide, please. So today's objectives are to understand the role and responsibility of self-disclosure as it pertains to working with peers. So when we identified this as a potential topic, I think one of the things we really wanted to highlight is that there's kind of the self-disclosure piece from a clinical perspective, but then really wanting to contrast that with the self-disclosure piece as a peer, because those are very different relationships. And I think, I have a lot to learn on that piece of it, but self-disclosure is such an important part, I think, of the peer relationship, but really understanding how it's different or not different and kind of in what scenarios it might be used. So we're super excited to be able to really contrast that to the last lecture we had. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the potential impact of self-disclosure on peers and colleagues. Next slide, please. Here's our faculty members, and I think everybody is here today. Welcome and thank you, faculty people. Next slide, please. So session logistics, mute your line if you're not speaking. All the rest of the stuff, engage in respectful dialogue. We really do encourage people to keep the camera on, particularly when we're having the case conversation. It's just so much easier to talk to people when you see their screens as opposed to seeing just a black box. So please, please, please keep your camera on. It's fine to eat. You're going to be witnessing me eating my lunch, so it's totally fine. Drink coffee, whatever you need to do. There are no rules. And I know a lot of people are having a snow day today. So if you have small children running in or dogs, as the case may be in my life as well, that's also totally fine. So just leave your camera on and we will roll with whatever comes our way today. Next slide, please. You'll get CME, so you get an email shortly after the lecture and fill out the survey link, and then you will get CME, which is awesome. Next slide, please. The session's being recorded. You heard that it's already started. We're going to be very cautious today to just record through the end of the didactic as always, and then there'll be time for questions. And I can see this being a very rich conversation about integrating peers as part of your team. And so we will have that conversation. And then, as I said, Tanisha and I will do a case. Next slide, please. Okay, so we have Amanda Thompson who's up. And I don't have a formal bio of Amanda Thompson, but I have worked with Amanda Thompson now for, I don't know, a couple of years. And Amanda and her team are truly exceptional. And I think I am so fortunate that they are part of our MaineMOM team. I think there's really nothing more important, really, I think, in our program than the relationship that our moms who are feeling scared and overwhelmed and vulnerable can develop with their peers. And I think I just continue to be incredibly grateful for the willingness to do this work and to put themselves out there and to support our moms in this way. And I also just genuinely really appreciate also the sort of structure that's inherent to our peer network in terms of, taking care of each other and making sure that folks are safe in their own recovery, and just kind of, it's just a beautiful thing to watch. So I'm truly fortunate to have Amanda and her team part of our team, and it's been beautiful to watch. And I think this is a really important topic to really understand how our patients interact with their peers and what that looks like. And so I will pass it to Amanda, and thank you for coming.
Thank you, Elaine. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Amanda Thompson. I'm the program manager for the substance use peer recovery programs at Maine Behavioral Healthcare. I'm also a person in long-term recovery from polysubstance use. And so we talked last month about some clinical self-disclosure. And so today we're going to talk about self-disclosure and peer support relationships, so sharing lived experience. And these relationships are really individualized and pretty nuanced. I'm going to try not to get too into the weeds because that is a real possibility, because it's just so different when we talk about just being with individuals around their experience. So here we go. Next slide, please. So what is peer recovery support? To have a peer support person or a recovery coach, I'm going to sort of use those two phrases interchangeably for this presentation. It's part of the MaineMOM model to have somebody, with lived experience as part of the team. And so peer recovery support is provided by individuals who have lived experience in recovery, and they're coming to this work, to these roles, with a willingness to share openly about their journey. So we're starting with self-disclosure from introduction. When we meet someone, I say, hi, my name's Amanda, I'm a person in recovery. And so we're starting right off the bat, acknowledging that there's going to be a level of self-disclosure in the creation of that relationship. So it is through self-disclosure that enables us to start to establish a relationship with this other person, being curious about what their experience is. And so really starting from a place of connection with someone and starting to build some trust in that relationship. That is really the thing that most of us need in early recovery, to start taking some risks, to try some new things, and develop sort of a pathway forward in making changes in our lives. It's through that sharing with another person that we get the opportunity to sort of start to craft a vision of what does life look like without substances, or with lower use of substances. And so fear, loneliness, isolation, these are all barriers to treatment or barriers to recovery. And so when you can start to open up relationships with other people, that is really the catalyst to be able to reorient to a hope-based and possibility-based future. Next slide, please. So right off the bat, we're going to talk about self-disclosure in these relationships. And so the question really is what do we share and when do we share it? How are we making these decisions? So how much or how little each person shares in that relationship really depends on the connection. And that evolves naturally. Some people come to these relationships really ready to, have really in-depth conversations about what their experience has been. And other people, it takes a little bit of warming up and getting to know each other before the levels of self-disclosure for both people are feeling comfortable. The things that we may talk about are not necessarily limited to our experience in recovery. We really look at the whole person. And so we might talk about family dynamics, our experience through our pregnancy, raising children, the way that we have moved through trauma, what our healing journey has looked like, healthcare issues that we've experienced. So it's not necessarily just about substance use recovery. And one of the pieces of that is that we are accurately speaking to the experiences that we have had or the ones that we have not had. And so I think sometimes to avoid uncomfortable self-disclosure, people have a tendency to sort of generally agree to something. So people will say, well, you know what it's like when X, Y, Z. And if I have not had that experience, I'm quick to say that's not something that I've experienced. I've heard it described in different ways, but I'm really curious what your experience is. And I think that's a little bit different than some other relationships. And so again, connection, vulnerability, honesty, trust, mutuality, and negotiation are really the things that we're focused on when we're thinking about decision-making and that self-disclosure. Next slide. So this is the piece I think is most sort of in contrast with the clinical aspect of self-disclosure, is that we have flexibility to negotiate boundaries and limits in these relationships. And so this can look very different than the clinical perspective on boundaries in general. And so this can include weekend or evening calls that are negotiated between two people, spending time together in the community, visiting at home, being connected on social media. And so because it looks so different, that opens up a wider or more broad possibility for self-disclosure. If you're connected with somebody on social media, they have access to those pieces of what your life looks like in a very different way. And so another thing that is really different is that there may be topics that come up in a conversation that we find to be activating or triggering. It's not an expectation of a peer support role or a recovery coach role that folks are coming to those roles fully healed with no
So we're hoping she'll come back. We were a little concerned about the weather. So that I suspect is the problem. Um, yeah.
Mic check.
You're back. You're back.
Yeah. Oh no, I got the unstable message. Well, hold on one second. Okay. How is it?
It's good now. We didn't hear much, I think, in what you were going to say. You were frozen for probably a minute or so. So you may want to back up just a little bit in terms of what you were
Do this whole
saying.
slide again?
Sure.
Okay, sure. We're winging it today, right? All right. So talking about negotiating boundaries and limits in the peer support relationships, this can look very different than the clinical perspective of boundaries. And so we have the opportunity to negotiate like when we are going to connect with people. And so that can look like weekend or evening calls. We may spend time together in the community or visit somebody at their home or be connected on social media. And so because of this different access, it opens up a wider range of like self-disclosure possibilities. So like if you're connected with somebody on social media, they are able to see, pieces of your life that maybe some other folks are not witnessing. And so there's like a higher level of vulnerability in that, which opens up possibility for a higher level of negotiation and like what both people are comfortable with. And so another piece of this that looks a lot different than like the clinical sort of level of self-disclosure is that there may be topics that come up in conversation that we find to be activating or triggering. So it's not an expectation of peer support roles that folks are coming to those roles like fully healed, not experiencing triggers around like hard or heavy topics in conversation. And so it's okay for us to speak to those pieces of like what comes up for us and then ask for what we may need so that we can stay in the relationship and stay in the conversation. So that might look like saying to somebody like, I've got to be honest with you, like I'm noticing that like, some of the things that you're sharing with me are like hitting me pretty hard and I can feel that I'm having a hard time with this. Is it okay if we like maybe back up a little bit and share what's going on with like less detail? Because I'm noticing that the details of like your story is what's getting me sort of like going. And so like in that openness of negotiation, it also leaves space for the other person to say like, hey, the thing that you just shared with me is like hitting me really hard. And so we have some, an opportunity to create some mutuality where both people are sort of taking responsibility for what's happening in the relationship. Next slide, please. So we think about, what are we responsible for when we think about self-disclosure? And so acknowledging that there is an existing power dynamic in peer support relationships is important. I'm in a paid role. And so sometimes when I am meeting with folks that are new to recovery too, the amount of time that I have in recovery or in abstinence like creates a power dynamic also. And so we talk about this a little bit in this idea of like praise versus celebration. So people may come and say like, I've got something I'm really excited to share with you. Like, you're going to be so proud of me. And so I don't want to be the person who sets the bar of like what is good or what is like solid recovery and what is not. And so the way that I would navigate that is to say like, I can tell that you're super excited about what's going on and I would really love to hear it. I know how difficult things have been for you and I can see that you're really like celebrating this as like a personal win and I'd love to celebrate with you. And stay away from the praise of like, this is so good. You've done a great job. Because if I'm setting the bar of like what is good and what is bad, then we're increasing that power dynamic for when things maybe are not going well for somebody. There's fear of like, I don't want to share that with Amanda because she thought that I was doing so well. So we just want to be mindful of that. We talk about that pretty often. I really love this acronym of WAIT. Why am I talking? Kind of being intentional with what you're sharing, making sure that you're leaving a lot of space for listening and that feels balanced for both people. And also to ask yourself, like, does the relationship that I have with this person support this level of self-disclosure? Do I have an idea of how this is going to land? You want to be careful about like sharing, lots of pieces of your experience with somebody that you haven't met. You kind of want to ask yourself, like, am I connected enough with this person to know like how this may impact them if I share this with them? We don't want to self-disclose as a means to shortcut somebody's process in their recovery. So like, this is what worked for me, and I think that you should do it too. Again, like acknowledging that there's a power dynamic in play there. Our conversations that we have with folks are confidential, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the person that we're supporting is holding the same value. So I don't want to share something with somebody that then could like trickle into the community in some way if I'm not like fully comfortable with that piece of my story sort of being out for everyone. But we also want to acknowledge that like navigating disconnect and upset is a part of being in relationships with people. So I don't want to not disclose something because I am uncomfortable around it or I'm not sure how it's going to land. I want to accept that part of being connected with people is that there's bound to be disconnection and that we can navigate that successfully in the relationship and not use it as a sort of backstop to like not disclose something and say like, no, that's going to be too much for someone, or they're not in the space to hear that. Like, take the risk and know that we can navigate disconnect in relationships. Next slide. So sharing with colleagues, sharing with the teams that we work on is very different than sharing in our one-on-one relationships. It's a different audience. And so sometimes the clinical guidance around a peer self-disclosure has a tendency to shift these relationships like out of their intended mutual and reciprocal qualities. And that's something that we navigate just like in team meetings and in different places where we're talking, you know, with a multidisciplinary team. But we also want to acknowledge that like that can feel it can feel almost like stigmatizing, I guess, to have somebody say to you like, you shouldn't have shared that, or that feels maybe unprofessional or inappropriate. It increases that stigma to say that like my lived experience, I'm not necessarily fully safe to share my lived experience here. So just being mindful of that in the way that we just sort of keep tabs on like where we're at with our self-disclosure. How comfortable are we? How much safety do we feel is like sort of established in our team? The peers have insight to how the system operates from a unique perspective, and that sometimes can be difficult to hear. That things are not working well through your system or through your office. It is a unique perspective that holds a lot of value, and so if you can really sort of lean into that perspective. It offers valuable pieces of information that ultimately are, how that system impacts patients. And so being mindful of creating a culture where folks can openly share about what's going on for them increases safety, like I said, which helps to decrease stigma. But then we have an opportunity to openly share too when we're struggling and need to get some of the support around our own recoveries. And so if there's any question, about like, is this all right? What did this person mean when they shared this piece? It's okay to ask. It's okay to sort of try it out also, like with your level of self-disclosure of like, I'm a little confused, like why maybe you said that thing, and have an opportunity to open a dialogue up. And I'm always a big fan of role plays. I know that people, that's sometimes not the most fun thing to do, but I think it's a really unique learning opportunity that in peer support relationships, we do it pretty often as a way to sort of like try it out and see how things may go. Next slide. So I just wanted to give a quick special thank you to the peer recovery team at MBH for their guidance, insight, and the sharing of their lived experience. And I listed like the three pieces of like core material that we use in training. And I didn't pick out specific pieces because again, like a lot of how we learn to navigate this is rooted in lived experience, trying it out, sort of some trial and error and see how it goes. So even our training manuals will sort of pitch a question of like, do you think this is helpful or harmful to share this piece? And the answer really is, well, it depends. And so we learn a lot like through the dialogue back and forth. And again, like sharing those pieces of our lived experience. That's it.